Welcome to the Gridiron Expert. I'm Connor Hibbett. Next up on our team previews, we're going to be looking at the Tennessee Volunteers. And joining us on the show today is Mackenzie Freeman. Mackenzie, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Just working and having a good time doing that. So, yeah.
So before we get into the Vols, please tell us your affiliation with the team. Of course, with you, it's going to be more about like fandom because you're going to be like the Tennessee super fan on here. And then, of course, your background with media and sports media.
Yeah, so I'll get into how and why I'm a Tennessee fan in the first place. My parents were both born and raised in Tennessee, and I actually found out like not too long ago that my granddad actually went to Tennessee. He didn't graduate from there because he, lived the college life a little too hard,
Oh,
if you know what I mean.
okay.
Had a little too much fun. But yeah, parents born and raised there. So I grew up on Tennessee football, grew up, with Pat Summitt coaching the Lady Balls. And then, I've just been hooked ever since. And then as far as sports media goes, I've kind of known since late middle school, early high school that I wanted to get into sports media. So I joined our high school's like journalism program, and then that got me in into UNT. And then at UNT, I did our sports show called Sports Zone, where we talked a variety of different sports from the college level to the professional level. And now I'm out here in Kentucky working as a sports reporter at WIMT.
So, how is that going? I think you just started earlier this year officially, correct?
Yeah, I started in January. The first about week and a half was just basically training, your standard like this is our equipment, this is how we use our equipment, and some training videos. Um, but the basketball culture here, because I came here in the middle of basketball season, um, and basketball is big here. And as an ex basketball player, it makes my heart very happy. Um, they do all of their state tournaments at Rupp Arena for basketball. I got to go to the girls' state tournament. That was really fun. But I'm excited for football season.
Yeah, when it comes to basketball, in terms of like the brand there and all of the events that are held at Rep Arena, Kentucky and in the state of Kentucky for basketball is similar to LSU in the state of Louisiana with, there's a lot of smaller schools outside of Kentucky that are still huge into basketball. Western Kentucky used to be really good and programs like that.
Yeah, in Texas, you know how there's like 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A, 5A, 6A.
Yeah.
In Kentucky, there's one state champion. It doesn't matter if you're, well, football, they have classes because if they didn't, the 6A would kill 1As. But in basketball, baseball, and softball, there's one state champion. So if one of the smaller mountain schools makes it to the state tournament, that's pretty big.
Yeah, and so speaking of high school sports, I've been busy right now. I've been busy lately doing camera for baseball for all the playoffs, 4A, 5A, 6A, and on top of
Mm-hmm.
doing all these interviews for college football and getting ready for the 2025 college football season. So, we'll let that be our segue into the 2025 Tennessee Volunteers. So last year was a really good year for Tennessee. Just missed out on playing for the SEC championship, ended up making the college football playoff,
Mm-hmm.
played the eventual national champion in the Ohio State Buckeyes. So that was last year's Tennessee, and now there's a lot of new
Yeah.
faces that will have to step up and contribute for the Volunteers this year. Obviously, really talented team, but a lot of younger guys are going to have to step up. There's actually only
Mm-hmm.
9 scholarship seniors for Tennessee this season compared to the 15 that they had last year. That does not include walk-ons. So let's get started with a position group at quarterback that has had just a little bit of talk this offseason, just slightly. Only if we
Just a
had
little
more to
bit.
talk. Yeah, only if we had more to talk about there. So obviously, Nico goes to UCLA. In comes Joey Aguilar, the former App State guy and short-lived UCLA Bruin. So I know that behind Aguilar, there's some freshmen that Tennessee fans are very excited for in the future. But what does this quarterback
Mm-hmm.
room look like to you, in your opinion, for 2025?
So before I get into the quarterbacks that we're going to see this year, I want to get into kind of the schedule talk. And even if we had Nico, we're playing in the SEC. You know, we've got Georgia on our schedule. We've got Bama on our schedule. We have Florida on our schedule. With Nico, those are hard games. But now getting into Joey Aguilar, I actually think he's going to be a pretty decent quarterback. I saw, at App State, I think it was 3,000 yards, I think 23 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. So a little loose with the ball, but then you look at his touchdown numbers and you're like, well, if he can bring that interception total down at Tennessee, um, I think he'll be really good, especially with Josh Heupel. I mean, there's a couple of coaches that can plug and play a guy, but if I'm a college athlete, I'm looking at Josh Heupel, and if Tennessee was the only college that was willing to take him, I think that's a great spot for him to play in, to be honest.
It's a very friendly offensive system that Josh Heupel runs in Knoxville. And you're right. So 23 touchdowns, 14 interceptions last year for Joey Aguilar when he was at Appalachian State. And
Mm-hmm.
so if he limits the turnovers, there's I think certainly a higher floor for him, especially when you compare it to a rather young quarterback room outside of him at Tennessee. The question is, and
Mm-hmm.
I think everyone has this question for not just Joey Aguilar, but with Tennessee overall this year, what's the ceiling? I don't think there would be a ton of people that would argue, unless like Joey Aguilar ends up being just not a good quarterback and struggles with turnovers. I don't think if that does not happen, there would not be many people that would argue that Tennessee does not have a high floor. I think the question is again just what is the ceiling for Tennessee and what is the ceiling, quite frankly, for Joey Aguilar? And so I'll ask you, what do you think the best case scenario is for Joey Aguilar in 2025 in Knoxville?
I think best case scenario, you well, it's easier to go by worst case scenario because anything above the floor that I have in my head, I think most Tennessee fans will be happy. If he can get if we only lose 3 games next season, so if we go 9-3, I think that is meeting, if not exceeding expectations. And you're talking to someone that's lived through the Butch Jones era. There's been a 20-year gap. Well, maybe not 20, but you know what I mean. Like we
Yeah.
haven't been playing this high level of football for that long. So to sit here and say that, hey, if we can get 9 wins, that's a good season. We're not in Alabama who's had Nick Saban forever and like the expectation is a championship. We're just now kind of getting back into the groove, like the 1990s. Um, yeah, so I think worst case scenario, you you lose seven or you excuse me, you go 7-5, and then best case scenario, nine plus wins.
The schedule does provide a high floor, and we'll get into the schedule later with those specifics. But looking back on the field, so at running back, they lose Dylan Sampson, and Dylan Sampson was one of the best players in the country last year, not just best running backs, but yeah, he was a quality breakthrough player for Tennessee. So now it looks like it could be a running back by committee approach. There is good depth here. I don't know if there's necessarily an
Mm-hmm.
alpha. So Deshaun Bishop, Peyton Lewis, and then Duke transfer Star Thomas, and he was a star at New Mexico State before he transferred to Duke last year.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the thought here with the running back room? Is it going to be by committee, or do they think that there's going to be a standout here?
I definitely think it's going to be running back by committee. I do like the depth we have here, but none of these guys are Dylan Sampson. What Dylan Sampson did at Tennessee, I honestly think was unexpected. We all knew that he was good, but I don't think we thought that he was going to be as good as he actually was. And then I think Deshaun Bishop, Star Thomas, and Peyton Lewis are going to have to get in the mix there and kind of fill that because the running back position, aside from the quarterback, is super important to Tennessee's offense, especially the rate they play, how spread their offense is. If we don't have a good running back, it doesn't open up our wide receivers. You know what I mean? So those three guys are definitely going to have to step it up.
And speaking
And I'd
of,
like to.
oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry.
No, no,
I
you're
was
fine.
going to say I'd like to see what Justin Baker does. I know that he's coming in as a youngster, but looking at his high school stats, 1,000 yards, 14 touchdowns, average 10 yards a carry. If he can average, and I know it's rare to see a freshman play a whole lot, but given the team, and you kind of addressed it, with so many youngsters on the team, I think we'll see a little bit of Justin Baker this year, and I'm excited for that.
So you mentioned if you don't have a good running game, it makes life more difficult for the passing game, the quarterback, and then the receivers, especially if they can't create separation. So transitioning to that receiving core, there are a lot of questions here. So six of the top seven, at
Mm-hmm.
least in terms of production from last year, depart. Chris Brazel returns, and he's the most experienced option. Now, I don't know if Brazel is an alpha necessarily, but we'll see. Maybe he might have to become that. But what are your thoughts more so on the guys around Brazel? Because Mike Matthews, a former five-star who made 7 receptions last year, or who had 7 receptions last year for 90 yards and 2 touchdowns. What is? Do you have any concerns here, or do you think that this receiving core is going to end up being fine in Josh Heupel's offense?
I think we're going to be fine in Josh Heupel's offense. I mean, it's definitely one of my concerns that we're a young team, but young doesn't equal bad, if that makes sense. I think that's a misconception with college football is, oh, these guys are young, they're going to get pummeled. I think they'll be okay. I like Mike Matthews. I'm glad you mentioned him. Um, I think he'll be great in this offense. I think Mike Matthews will turn into the alpha on this wide receiver unit. And then obviously, Brazel, we're expecting him to kind of step up his game. Um, and even if he's not the top receiver on the team, I do think Brazel's going to have to be the leader in the locker room, no matter if he's the number one receiver or if he ends up being, fourth option, which he'll probably be second or third option because, like I said, there's just so many youngsters on this team. I think just in the wide receiver room alone, there's about six, either freshmen or redshirt freshmen. So,
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely going to be a more inexperienced unit this fall. And I'm glad you mentioned that what you started off with the receiving core there when you said just because a position group is young overall does not mean they're going to be bad. Totally agree
at
with you.
Ryan Williams.
Right. So I do want to say something on that real quick. And again, thank you for bringing that up. There's a lot of people that will, like, especially during the preview magazine season, which we are basically in right now, following the spring portal window closing. If there is a lot of production having to be replaced, a lot of people are assuming that, oh, they have questions. That means it's going to be bad. No, you have questions because there is uncertainty. There is a difference between
Right.
having guys who have a high ceiling, like Mike Matthews and others for Tennessee, that we just don't know about yet. So, do we know the floor and the ceiling? No. That's why we say there's questions, potential concerns if you don't have
Mm-hmm.
like enough depth because injuries happen in football. But there's a
Right.
difference between being bad and then having high quality. And there's certainly quality in this room. There's just a lot of uncertainty here. So yeah, it'll
Right.
be interesting, really spreading across this Tennessee offense that has a lot of production to replace. And so we'll transition here to the offensive line. So there is not maybe bad here, but there's uncertainty here. So there are 4 starters that have to be replaced from last year. However, they did do pretty well here in the transfer portal in terms of getting,
Mm-hmm.
we know what we should expect players. Like they got players with experience here. So the 1 starter that returns, and it might be the best, left tackle or the second best from last year, Lance Hurd. And then the 5 star freshman, David Sanders, is probably going to be playing opposite him at right tackle.
Right.
And then the interior projects a little bit more of a question, but this is where the transfers come in. So, Wendell Moe Jr. from Arizona, and then Sam Pendleton from Notre Dame likely will slide in at the guard positions, and I assume the center will be William Satterwhite. So, what are your thoughts on the offensive line and then the guys behind the starters here?
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Lance Hurd, big returner. He's going to be a leader on this line. I like Wendell Moe from Arizona. I think he's a big guy. It's exactly what you want on the line. He'll fit in there just fine. I think center is the biggest question mark on this offensive line. Not saying, oh, our centers are going to be bad. It's just I don't really know what to expect, but I think Satterwhite from Notre Dame will be a good fit right there. And then there's a couple of guys. Jesse Perry, I think we could see him being a backup for either the left guard or the right tackle. He's a question mark, but I think he'll be good in those positions. And I don't know. I think the biggest question mark is our center.
And would there be any worry or concern in Knoxville if there happens to be an injury or two on the offensive line? Because it feels like they did enough to piece together a potential quality starting offensive line, but whenever you get guys in the portal, whenever you're trying to plug holes, you're plugging holes to get those impact players to be starters. No one's going to transfer in, at least a meaningful transfer, to be a backup. They're not
Right.
going to transfer. That's why they're transferring to play more. So what does I mean? You mentioned Jesse Perry, and he's probably the fifth or sixth best offensive lineman here in this room. But is there quality depth where again, like if there's one or two injuries, there wouldn't be a much of a drop off?
That's a tough question to answer. Just because there's a few guys on this roster that I'm not familiar with, like Shamarad Umarov. I'm not familiar with his game. Same thing with Max Anderson. Um, Again, it goes back to the kind of what I said earlier. Just because they're young or inexperienced doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be bad. So it's hard for me to say, um, yeah, we don't have any depth on the offensive line. I just don't think that's true. Do I think, if one or two of these guys get hurt, the offensive line's going to take a drop off? Yes. I mean, if two starters go down, you put in two backups, it will take a dip, even if it's a small dip. But I think we'll be okay.
What do you think overall the identity of the offense will be this year?
I mean, I think we're going to stick to our foundations, the fast paced offense. Um, Unfortunately, I'm not the biggest fan of the running the ball on first and second down, open up a throw on third down. But if um, Aguilar can connect with uh, Mike Matthews or Brazel, then I really think we'll stick to that foundation. I mean, that's the Josh Heupel offense. That's the Tennessee offense, is keeping that speed, tiring out the other team. I think that'll be the identity of the team, just that fast-paced offense.
So moving over to the defense. So what's interesting about this group is that like last year, man, that defensive line, which I think could be really good again, it had like crazy depth last year. And this year they don't have as deep of a room, but the starters look really good. If I'm not so, if they live up to their ceiling, I think this could be a really good starting unit. So, Bailey and Joshua Josephs, who I think might be a breakthrough player this year in college football, that's a really good defensive end tandem there. And then in the
Mm-hmm.
middle, this is the position group that I don't think will be as strong as it was last year, but that's a very high bar to clear, and all defense to them. But Bryson Eason at defensive tackle has an opportunity to be a first, maybe second team All SEC this year. Um, what are your thoughts on the defensive line, and do you think this might be the strength of the team again?
Yeah, defensively, I definitely think that this is where our strength is, the defensive line. We also got the transfer from, I'm blanking on the school, but Josh Shell. I don't think he's going to be. He's definitely not going to be a starter, but I'm interested to see what he can do. I think he'll be a defensive tackle, probably behind Jackson Moy and David Hobbs. Um, but yeah, I think, and plus, I mean, Tim Banks, he is just an incredible coach. So I like to see what he does on this defense. Um, and honestly, I mean, looking at this depth chart, you've got you've got about three in each position. Both edges. You've got three, both tackles. You've got three guys in there. So it really just depends on how they are coming out of spring ball, how they do preparing for the season.
And at linebacker, so last year they didn't really stay healthy at linebacker,
Mm-hmm.
but at least they it entered the season as a question. There was a lot of uncertainty, as we've said a few times today on this video, but they ended up doing actually really well. Arian Carter and Jeremiah Talant Talander, I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name there. Um, but uh, they were the top two tacklers in the linebacker room last year, and they were two of the top four tacklers overall in the entire defense last year. They both returned, but I know that some Tennessee fans over the spring were wanting to get some transfer linebackers because they didn't like the depth, and they were worried. Hey, if one of these guys go down with an injury, given that Edwin Spillman, who returns this year, he had an injury that he was practically out all of last year. Will he be healthy? If this group stays healthy, I think it'll be really good. The question is, will they stay healthy? Because they didn't really get too many noteworthy guys in the portal that would be like a plug and play second or third
Mm-hmm.
linebacker here. So, yeah, again, if they stay healthy, I think all Tennessee fans know like who they have here if
Right.
they stay healthy. So, do you think the linebacker room has a higher ceiling than last year, or is it we know what to expect? They kind of are who they are, and it's just a matter of can they stay healthy?
I think staying healthy is huge. If one of these guys go down, I mean, like you mentioned, we know what we have in this linebacker core. But if one of these guys goes down, or maybe even two of them, who are we gonna fill in there? And that's where I think um, some of our secondary may have to be kind of trained in the linebacker position too, because you never know in the ebbs and flows of the season. You never know what's going to happen. But I do like Jeremiah Tallender. I do like Spillman. Um, as you mentioned, Arian Carter. I mean, he was huge. Um, so I like what we have. I think the key to this group is going to be you got to stay healthy.
Right. Okay, so it's Jeremiah Tallender. Okay. I'm learning some of these enunciations here. Okay, so this secondary. So this is a position group that, again, if they're healthy, because Jermon McCoy, will he be back for the first game of the season? Doubt it. And even if he is, he's probably not going to be at full strength. But let's look at this position group from a perspective of if McCoy's fully healthy. So if McCoy's fully healthy, Ricky Gibson returns opposite him at the other cornerback spot, and then you have a veteran backup and Jalen McMurray. And then there's Colorado transfer Colton Hood to provide quality depth. Now that's just the cornerback room. So if McCoy is healthy, you're talking now best player, a difference maker, a stud. So you have the ceiling here, and then you have a higher floor with the depth. So I like the cornerback room overall. I love it if I know McCoy's healthy. And then at
Right.
safety, um, there are more questions with the depth, but at least Turrentine returns at one of his safety spots. So, is this the proper breakdown? And obviously, I'll let you speak more about it, but what are your expectations for the Tennessee secondary this fall?
I think McCoy being healthy is going to be a huge factor. I liked what I saw out of him last season. I believe he was the one that got the uh, interception in the Alabama game, if I'm not mistaken. And
I don't
like,
remember off the top of my head.
I can't remember off the top of my head if it was the Alabama game, but He got a key interception last year in a close game that ended up helping the Vols win the game. Um, but then behind him, you have Jalen McMurray. I like him. I want to see more out of him. Ricky Gibson, obviously, a talented player. Like what I see out of him. And then as far as Colton Hood from Colorado goes, I agree with you that he kind of elevates the floor for depth. I like what I saw out of him. I think he can read in zone. I think he's quick on his feet. I like that transfer portal pickup.
And then you're by the way, you were correct. It was against Alabama. McCoy had the interception against that the key interception that you were discussing, and I think you returned it for like 54 yards.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that was a key play certainly in that game. Okay, so for the Tennessee fans watching this video, you may think you completely skipped over a player in the secondary that might have the highest ceiling. No,
Boo.
I did not. I wanted to save it for his own time
Boo.
here. Boo Carter. So yes, he's going to play the star position for the Tennessee defense this year in the secondary. But we know what his ceiling is. There's going to be multiple roles for Boo Carter. So I'm going to ask
Mm-hmm.
you, is he going to be a two-way player or is he just going to be DB and then kickoff or punt return?
Honestly, I think it depends on how healthy our secondary stays, and I think it depends on how healthy our linebackers stay. I think Boo is going to be. I think he'll get. I think he'll get some opportunities to be a two-way player in some of our not. It's weird to say, but like in our not as hard games,
Hmm.
like maybe against Kentucky or Mississippi State or at the beginning of the season when we play Syracuse. But again, I think if the secondary stays healthy and the linebacker room stays healthy, I think we'll see him be a two-way player because I'm pretty sure he basically negotiated that in his NIL contract
Oh,
when he renegotiated it, uh, where like he's and this may not be true, but I'm pretty sure I saw it somewhere. I'll have to double check it, but like he was he got more money because he knew how much of an impact he would have on this team. So I definitely think if we're going to pay him the big bucks, we're going to see him on both sides of the ball.
right. Yeah, he has at least another year after this season of college football. You don't want to lose a guy like that in the portal because he
No.
didn't live up to a potential promise here. So
Right.
if he is a two-way player, meaning that he plays a little bit of offense as well, is he going to be like a hybrid, like slot, or like a guy using like in jet motions and maybe out of the backfield, something like that, or is he going to be used as like a pure wide receiver on certain situations, especially depending on if some of those new faces in the receiving core maybe are not doing their job in the clutch or whatever.
I think we'll see him more in the slot and coming out of the backfield, um, just because he's not one of the tallest guys out there, but he is kind of stocky. And if they put more weight on him this offseason, I have to see his height and weight right now. Um,
He's about 5'10", 200.
right, exactly. So I don't think he'd be that useful, on the outside playing wide receiver. But
Right.
you slide him in there, have him do a short route. Um, I think that's where we'll see him is out of the backfield.
You kind of froze there for a second. Do you mind repeat,
Yeah.
do you mind repeating what when you were just saying you can see him coming out of the backfield and then so forth from there?
Yeah, I definitely see him coming out of the backfield just because he's not the tallest guy. I don't think we necessarily need him on the outside because even though we have some uncertainty at that wide receiver position, we do have a lot of guys, senior to freshman, that are listed as wide receiver that we can plug in there and have Boo Carter kind of make some of those short 10-yard gains or 5-yard gains, stuff like that.
So what's really interesting about Boo Carter being a two-way player, and then you mentioned some of the more winnable games on Tennessee's schedule this year. You included Kentucky, Mississippi State, and then you talked about Syracuse in the season opener. What's interesting about that Syracuse matchup is that we might have two-way players in that game, both underclassmen. So Boo Carter, obviously for the Vols, and then Demetrius Samuel for the Syracuse Orange. He's actually a freshman cornerback for them. So the college football enthusiasts out there that like to tune into every game, there's another additional reason to tune into the Orange against the Volunteers. You're going to have two exciting younger athletes that most of the country outside those respective fan bases are actually not talking about right now. All right, so
Right.
Mackenzie, before our time runs up here on the meeting here, earlier in this meeting, you talked about the schedule, and I said we would get into it later. So Tennessee for this year, it's actually a pretty manageable schedule, at least for SEC
Yeah.
standards. So at Alabama, hosting Oklahoma, at Florida, certainly stick out there with the difficulty. Oh, and then hosting Georgia, obviously. But really, outside of those four games, it's pretty manageable. I'll let you discuss here those individual games, but I know there's a lot of talk with Tennessee, like can they replace Nico? And like everyone's like way down on Tennessee, and you know what? Maybe they don't have as good of a team as last year. We'll see. But
My hot take, my hot take is as much as I am a Tennessee fan, again, being a sports enthusiast, I can kind of look from the bigger picture. I don't even think Nico would have been the top quarterback in the SEC this year.
no, I mean he would have been like seventh or eighth, actually, in my opinion. But
Exactly. So to say that this Tennessee team is going to fail without Nico, to me, is kind of absurd. If anything, I think if this Tennessee, okay, well, it depends on how Aguilar does. That's one factor. But I think, what can this running back room do? Because, again, as I said earlier, this running back room is going to be huge for us. But yeah, looking at the schedule, you've got Syracuse. I think that one's a win. East Tennessee, that's a win. Georgia, that's I would love to see us win, but I think that one's a loss. Then you have UAB. I think that's a win. Then you're at Mississippi State. I don't think that should be a problem.
right,
So in your first 6 games, I see Tennessee going 5-1, and then this is kind of the interesting part of the schedule where you play versus Arkansas. We lost to them last year, but people talk about the Neyland effect. I think we can manage Arkansas. I think it'll be a tough one. I think it'll be a close one for sure. So I have us winning that one. At Alabama, pains me to say this, I have us losing that one. At Kentucky, I think that's a win. Oklahoma, I think that's a win, a tough win, kind of like Arkansas. It's going to be one of those gritty games. And then New Mexico State, I have that as a win. At Florida, I think that's a loss. And then versus Vandy, I think that's a win. So with that being said, I think 9-3 is a good expectation for Vols fans to have.
agreed.
But I wouldn't be surprised if we lose to an Oklahoma or an Arkansas. That wouldn't surprise me. So that's where I say I think 7-5 is the floor, and then anything above. I think 10-2 realistically is the ceiling, because who knows? We could be a Georgia or an Alabama or a Florida. Especially Florida late in the season, we don't know what teams are going to look like as far as injuries go. So I think 10-2 definitely is the ceiling, and then 7-5 is the floor.
Right. And I like what you brought up earlier, alluding to if Tennessee ends up disappointing this year, it's not going to be because of what they did not have in Nico, because that's
Yeah,
where I think the a lot of the national perspective might be incorrect. And again, I agree with you, Mackenzie. I don't think Nico would have been, a tremendous upper echelon quarterback in the SEC this year. If he hits his ceiling, there's a chance he improves. There was certainly room for growth for Nico, and everybody was talking about that in the Tennessee program. But he was like eighth or ninth best quarterback last year in the SEC. So if you are thinking that because Tennessee doesn't have Nico, that they're going to fall off the face of the earth, No, it's not because of
No.
that. Just like, and the same group of people are saying, "Oh my gosh, UCLA, UCLA," because they have Nico. Like, I mean, UCLA will still be fighting to simply try to make a bowl game. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with your point there, Mackenzie. There's obviously some questions and a lot of position groups for Tennessee, especially the depth this year more so than it was last year. But yeah, to say that, Tennessee is going to regress only because they don't have Nico, I think is an improper way to look at this. I totally agree.
Yeah. And I think one position group that we didn't really talk about that's going to be huge is going to be the tight end. I think that our tight ends are going to help us a lot this season, especially if our running backs can't get going. I've got Miles Kesselman. Even though he's dealing with an injury right now, I think he'll be healthy by the time season starts. I'm excited to see what he can do alongside Ethan Davis. I think those will be two huge pieces for the Vols offense.
Well, Mackenzie, really good job with this preview of the 2025 Tennessee Volunteers, and we really appreciate you jumping on the channel with us. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.